Coldest. Well, the writer and broadcaster Stephen Fry has been in his home county of Norfolk today, signing copies of his new autobiography. There's been some controversy over his decision to sign a letter published in the Guardian newspaper objecting to certain aspects of the Pope's visit. When I spoke to him earlier, he said he was baffled over the reaction to the letter.
The only thing I said, which I believe, is that it's wrong that it should be a state visit. As much as anything, it's unfair on other religious leaders. And it sort of uses a rather weird, not really a truth, that the Vatican City is a state. So I think it's a bit odd that the British taxpayer is being required to foot the bill. That's all the point I made, and I have no quarrel with this visit at all. Otherwise, if I'm not allowed to say that I think it's a bit peculiar that he's being treated as a head of state, then I don't know what our democracy has come to. It's as simple as that.
You're often referred to it as a national treasure, and your every quip, your every tweet is analysed in this way. Is that an honour or is it a trial for you?
Well, it's a great honour to be spoken of in those terms, but I suppose it's a trial in as much as I suppose my name is the one that's plucked out, as in the example of the letter signed to the newspaper. But no, of course, I'm very lucky to have so many followers and to have people who are keen to see me and like me. I couldn't be anything other than very proud.
In your autobiography, you're very frank about your sexuality, about your problems with your weight. Is that hard for you to be so open, or do you find it sort of therapeutic?
It's not particularly hard for me, I suppose, because that's the point of writing the book. Once I've decided to write an autobiography, I think the whole purpose is you've got to kind of, deal on with the reader, which is if I say something, it ought to be true, and if I'm talking about myself, I shouldn't hide too much. It's actually harder, I think, for one's friends and family to see me being honest about myself than it is for me.
This is a publishing first, because not only is it coming out as a hardback, it's coming out as an e-book and an app. You're a great believer in the importance of technology.
I'm in a traditional bookshop here, surrounded by that wonderful thing, a book. I love books. I love paper books, and like everybody, it's a common thing to hear people say, oh, but I like the smell and the feel of paper. Well, so do I. But I think, what technology does, it doesn't always replace things, it enhances, it complements. The fact is we now have 2 ways of reading, or 3 or 4 or 5 ways of reading, but the electronic book, I think, if people only did one thing, and that was they got themselves an e-reader, whether it's, a Kindle or an iPad, or I'm sure you know all the different names, Sony e-reader and so on. If you got one of these, and every time you went on holiday, instead of taking 5 books, you put them on one of those, you would be saving hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel, because when we say electronic book, we literally mean electronic book. The book is made of electrons, which have no mass, no weight. So an e-reader that has 1,000 books on it doesn't weigh a tenth of a gram more than one that has no books on it.
Stephen Fry, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, now the weather, and I think it's fair to say we've had a bit of everything this year. A few days of sun, very few. Lots of rain, loads of snow, and some very cold days and nights. We were cold for weeks on end, it seems.
But there is a place in our region that's consistently on the cold side, especially at night when temperatures plummet. In the third of our reports looking at wild weather, Richard Daniel has been finding out why.
The Brecklands on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, a stark landscape of forest, heath and farmland. In the winter of 1963, the temperature fell to a very chilly -19 Celsius. So why is it so much colder here than anywhere else? Well, that's largely down to what I'm standing on. This dark, sandy soil is the reason why it's so much colder here, particularly so at night. Now, the reason is that between the sand particles there are air gaps. And unlike in a clay soil, that means that when the surface heats up, the heat doesn't transmit down into the soil. I can demonstrate that with this thermometer. This is the temperature on the surface at the moment, about 31.3 Celsius. And if I push it in just a few centimetres, you'll see the temperature starts to plummet. In a way, it's a little like being in a desert, where the nights are also very cold. And that microclimate affects Roger Gamble's perception of the landscape.
Well, anyone who lives in the country is so aware of changes of weather conditions from day to day and from hour to hour, and an artist picks up on that. This landscape is shaped by the weather. It's entirely shaped by the weather, and so it's not pretty, it's not chocolate boxish.
Temperature extremes here are much greater than the UK average. There's even the chance of frost in summer. It may be a harsh place, but it also has a subtle, alluring beauty.
Daniel, in Breckland.
There's a special programme focusing on our wild weather. It's on Monday evening at 7:30 on BBC One.
And some of those places will be cold tonight, presumably.
I'm sure they will, actually. It's a good night for Breckland.